that the general title, as we all know, understanding marginality. This is a very broad and general topic, but so I have three parts of my lecture. Hope I'll be able to do within next maybe 1 hour. The first one, I'll try to talk about little theoretical, philosophical approaches to the idea of understanding marginality. So the second part, of course, will take you back to the idea of that how the discourse of marginalities we can understand from Indian society, literature, and culture. And the third, of course, that how in recent times, very contemporary actually, that there have been contestation towards the idea of what is called subjugation, oppression, exploitation, so that that I can have my example from Dalit expression. Dalit expression has to be understood in a very complex way. The term Dalit first has to be understood in a political term. The Dalit is, the term itself is political. The moment we utter the word Dalit, it that assumes the significance of what is called being political, because all other words, say Shudra, Tishudra, Panchama, Antyaja, Harijan, depressed classes, and the constitutionally that use official word called the scheduled caste, is being replaced by the term Dalit. So I will try to analyze the context in which the term Dalit has been come to be used in recent years. The second, of course, that I'll try to talk about what is new about Dalit expression, because Dalit literature, when we talk about, is modern Dalit literature. I must try to explain here, because there is also, in ancient time and medieval time, Dalit expression, but that I will not perhaps that talk more about say ancient and medieval, but try to talk about modern, because the idea of modern that will try to take us maybe that to the very many layers that we are trying to study Indian literature. So that let me begin with the whole idea of that asking question. I generally that ask too many questions, so that pardon me if I can that ask you too many questions instead of answering. I'll leave some of the question so that you can think about, and you can stop me anytime if you have any doubts and kind of that question that you would like to have. But that I'm sure my that lecture will be kind of dialogical. That what we talk about, it will be a dialogue more than a that one way lecture. So I begin the whole idea of how does one understand marginality. This is the first question that one can think about. Because when we talk about marginality, the term, the idea of margin immediately comes into the picture. And theoretically and philosophically speaking, when we talk about the margin, there is also a center we can imagine. Yeah. So the relationship between center and margin, that is a kind of process whereby we have to understand very many sphere of maybe that it is not just life, also culture, also language, idea, philosophy, imagination, expression, meaning there are several things that one can think about, that when we talk about margin. Now, when we talk about margin and center, the most important thing is to address the idea of power, because there is power relationship. When we talk about margin and the center, periphery and the center, margin and the center, we always, that think about there is power. It may be in subtle form. It is not necessarily, that could be, that seen, could be thought about, or also that imagine, meaning there are subtle power relationship between, say that when I'm speaking, perhaps, that I'm privileged to speak here because, that I come from that position. So the idea of positioning power, one is to understand about. Now, in the context of the world, I'm talking from general to particular, that from macro to micro, that I'll try to, to begin with the whole idea of, the discourse of power, discourse of marginality, whereby there could be several locations whereby this idea of power relationship could evolve. See, when we look at the world, I'm not just meaning I'm not confined to India only. I'll that slowly come to the examples of India. But when we say that see a kind of positioning of say in the context of black and white, so there is racial discrimination. In the context of men and women, there is patriarchy, what is called gender. And within gender, of course, I'll try to problematize by bringing the whole idea of maybe, that third gender, LGBTQ, that the idea of hijra, for example, coming to the purview of literature or literary study now. So the idea of gender, including third gender, that, and of course there are complications because that within third gender also we have to that bring the whole idea of say transgender, all kinds of that marginal position, that people those who are at the receiving end. Now, when it comes to also language, yeah, language, there are n number of issues. Say whether that English as a language is powerful, that or more powerful than the other language, or Hindi in Indian context will be more powerful than say maybe Tamil or Telugu or Odia or Bengali or so language, nationalism. So what I'll try to emphasize here when we talk about the discourse of marginality, there are several conceptual that positioning whereby we have to, that we cannot or should not confine to say, that say few conceptual, maybe, that positioning, because it could be caste, it could be gender, it could be also class, it could be also nationality, it could be also language, it could be gender, it could be also religion, that the idea of minority versus majority, etc., etc. So given these positioning, what I would like to, to tell you is that there could be several advantages, that from, that which we have to look at the idea or the discourse of marginality in a very complex and, that broad manner. Now, that when I talk about caste, class, gender, religion, nationality, language, and gender. And of course, there is ethnicity also, there is another term. It will be difficult on my part to address all these questions, that. So given my, maybe, that the kind of research that I've been doing, it is better that I give examples from Indian context, instead of going very broad and very general into the world, that scenario. And thanks for, that our, the focus will be Indian literature. So we'll confine our understanding of marginality in Indian context, giving example from maybe Indian literature, culture, and of course society. And maybe, that little about language maybe and gender I will try to touch. Now, that just to begin my lecture, that what I would like to emphasize here, that while giving, say, that examples from India, of course, that we have a theoretical positioning, whereby I begin a quote from Ajad Sion. This is, that a very recent writing. And the author has a book called Writing Outside the Nation. Why I emphasize this book? Because there are several locations I have already told you, people across the globe, they are considered to be outside the nation. Now, you know that this is Ajad Shian book, Writing Outside the Nation, very pertinently talks about people those who are considered to be at disadvantageous position. Yeah, because of several locations, of course, you know that. So it could be caste, it could be class, gender, nationality, language, religion, and ethnicity. I just begin this quotation so that we understand about the theoretical and philosophical position in which I try to justify my position while understanding the idea of marginality. I quote, that Ajat. The work of commemoration is often the only means of releasing our histories from subjugation to official or institutionalized regimes of forgetting. Remembering is an act of lending coherence and integrity to a history interrupted, divided, or compromised by instances of loss. We engage in history not only as agents and actors, but also as narrators or storytellers. In narrative, we may be able to redress forcibly forgotten experiences, allow the silences of history to come to word, and imagine alternative scripts of the past. Our understanding of the present is invariably predicated on actual or imagined links to or ruptures from a recollect past. So, I quote this because in India, in Indian context, for example, Dalits who are more than 330 millions, the hope, that 16% population of India are considered to be Dalit. And I'll try to define who is a Dalit in Indian context, though it is very, that understandable term, the very common and understandable term. I'll try to complicate the matter by bringing also other, the criteria of understanding Dalit. So 330 millions, more than 330 millions, according to 2011 census, more than 16% people are considered to be, that scheduled caste. Now, if we try to read history of India, there is always a vacuum. Where is Dalit history? That is the first question that we would like to address. I always ask, that student of literature, whoever they are and wherever they are, the first question I generally ask, where did you read about Dalit character in Indian literature? These are some of the questions that we have to address today. Yeah. So Ajad, who talked about silences, that over the years, Indian literature and history are silent about the existence of more than 330 millions of people who actually make the nation. Yeah, because being the producer, they are the producer of this, that country. Whatever you see, say, I always ask question, who make roads, who make railways, who make flyover, who produce grains for us, who make clothes for us? No, all these questions, that we have to ask. Now, if history is silence, that about these people, Kalyan Rao, you must have heard about, many of you, who is a Telugu author, in his novel, that is the first novel, Untouchable Spring, Antarjami Basantam is the original title. Kalyan Rao, the first sentence that he writes, that in his novel is, where is my history? Where is my ancestors' history? No, see, he begins with, and the novel talks about each generation of Dalit subjectivity. Yeah. Um, each generation, that not one generation. And Untouchable Spring, which is part of our Delhi University syllabus, is considered to be a Dalit epic. I will, of course, that come back to, that this maybe idea of Dalit epic later. But, that I'm talking about why the history is silent about certain community, be it maybe Hijra. No, beginning from Ramayana and Mahabharata, we know about Hijra, the position of Hijra, third gender. But do we have proper articulation about them? Do we have history? So when we talk about, say, Indian historiography, literary historiography, I'm talking about, there are no, no way we can claim that Indian literature belongs to them, or that their voices are being recorded. With this kind of, that so the rupture that Ajat talks about, that the idea of silences and the rupture, and then he talks about scripting the past so that, that we can have new voices. This is precisely what, that we are talking about. So today, if you read Dalit literature, tribal literature, women of all community, of course, we'll go to the extent by saying, or that's a there is a finest, maybe that there is a that there is an autobiography by Baby Haldar, yeah, life less ordinary, I'm sure many of you have read, yeah, a domestic help writing her autobiography today, yeah, or a Hijra like Revati, that is the first Hijra autobiography in Indian context. Of course, now there are too many Hijra autobiographies. Yeah, so what I'm just trying to give you examples that if at all today we hear these, the voices coming from the margins and trying to talk about making their presence felt in the public sphere, then, that we have to understand that thanks for maybe, that the idea of maybe modernity, education, and of course, that there are ample example I can give you, which the condition in which, that these people are able to speak, write, and of course, that document their life, it perhaps is an attempt how the marginalized voice actually, that over the years who wanted to perhaps, that have self-expression could not be, that because of certain condition, and now they can speak. Yeah. So Dalit literature for that matter, that is speaking truth to power, that speaking truth to power, if we can theorize it. So the idea of, that when I began with the whole idea of marginal discourse, power is at the center. The peripheries are nowhere to be seen. Now, thanks for certain, that adequate, maybe, that number of agencies working for the advantage of these marginals, they can now have self-expression so that we can not only listen to, also try to bring to the context in which they are, that claiming maybe, that power from the below. So let me, begin my, that proper lecture, that what is called the idea of maybe, that Dalit subjectivity, whereby Indian literature, as I have already told you, was silent over millennia, not centuries, that I use the word millennia. And that's why, that the first thing that I always address is that if at all Dalit literature today exists, that is precisely because Indian literature was silent about community called Dalits who were never given a voice. So, that to begin with, the idea of Indian literature, as we all know, that of course we try to use this word Indian literature in plural, Indian literatures, because India, as we all know, is multicultural, multilinguistic, multi-ethnic, multi religious, etc., etc. Given these, that multiculturalism, whereby, that the idea of writing, because, that when we talk about literature, the most important thing that we have to understand is education. Yeah. Without education or without literacy, literature is not possible. There was oral literature, for example, that you can tell story, you can say, sing song. So that is folk literature. But that without documentation, unless and until a culture is documented, we have no way as a student of literature we can try to examine the text, because oral literature has to be documented. No, without documentation, there is no way we can try to prove or interrogate, that the voices that is coming from, that anywhere maybe. Now with this, that what we need to know is that in India, strangely, education was not allowed to, as we all know, that Shudra, Ati Shudra in women in the past, beginning from maybe ancient time. I just try to touch upon this point, that Shudra, Ati Shudra and women were bar education in India. So there was no literacy. Why? Because that there is what is called that a hierarchized system in India, which is very strange, because almost all countries that you go, there are hierarchy, but Indian hierarchy is very different, because that this hierarchy is based on certain social order. Yeah, social order, whereby that once it is that the conditioning is given, that that the caste hierarchy, as I that try to begin the whole idea of that the idea of purity and pollution, what sociologists talk about. The idea of purity pollution, that is so much so that once a Brahmin, always a Brahmin. Once a Shudra, always a Shudra. So Indian society, of course, that if we go back to history of India, the early civilization, which is considered to be Indus Valley civilization, historians tell us that there was no caste hierarchy. There is some kind of class hierarchy. Of course, the remnants, the old, whatever suppose old civilization we had of Indus Valley civilization is there to see, yeah, with great bath, great road, etc., etc. But what happened after Indus Valley civilization is some sort of what is called Varna, the idea of Varna. Varna is, of course, that to be translated into English as color. So, that it is not like black and white, but that Varna at one point of time, who made it, why, how, no one knows about. That you must read, maybe that you must have read hundreds of sociological that research and documents and books, that, and yet it is very difficult to understand at what point of time who made Varna to Jati. So Varna became Jati. Yeah. So the earliest literature that we know about is Rig Veda, of course. There is 10th mandala, whereby it has been mentioned that Purusa, no, there is Purusa, P capital. Purusa made 4 birds. This is Rig Veda, 10th mandala. Yeah, whereby it suggests that, that Brahma, that is not Brahma, Brahman. It suggests Brahman. Yeah. Brahman is, that perhaps the originator. He, it seems, that according to this sloka of 10th mandala, brought out 4 different kinds of Purusa. So Purusa brought out Purusa. This is very interesting. P capital brought out, that 4 different human beings. And the first, of course, that is Rajanya, Brahman, coming from mouth, Rajanya coming from arms, from Purusa I'm talking about. The third is, of course, Vaishya from thigh, and of course, Shudra from feet. Yeah, these 4 different kinds of people there coming out. This is called Varna. Yeah. And then, that according to Dharma Shastra, we have more than 220 Dharma Shastra, by the way. And the first Dharma Shastra that we know is Manusmriti. Everyone knows about Manusmriti. Manu Shastra, Manu Shahita, or Manusmriti. It codifies what is called Hindu law. And Hindu laws are nothing but caste law. I must tell you that there are more than 220 Dharma Shastra. Like you must have heard about Artha Shastra, Kama Shastra, and many other Shastra. There are more than 220 Shastra according to my research. And these are all caste law. Particularly, they're trying to enforce what is called caste law to the low caste and women of all communities. Enforcing. Now, if you violate Hindu laws, then you'll be punished according to the law. So let me tell that from Varna, that at one point of time, as I was telling you, that see, according to Dharma Shastra, this Varna, fourth Varna, Brahman, Kshatriya, Vaishya, Shudra, at one point of time became Jati. And later, one new addition was, that seen called Ati Shudra. From Shudra to Ati Shudra, who are now called untouchable. Look at the word, that untouchable. The term is very interesting, and that untouchable, that who becomes untouchable, no one knows, because there are lots and lots of, that arguments about whether, that you touch a person and you become untouchable. So there are poets now, Dalit poets, they ask about who is an untouchable, one who touches or one who is touched. Yeah. Now, that see, untouchables became a kind of, that anathema in Indian society, culture, and literature, because they not merely became untouchable, they also became unapproachable, unknowable, unhearable, and unapproachable. That these are some of the unseeable, unhearable, unknowable, unapproachable. These are some of the terms one can, that try to, that use it in Indian context. I can try to explain, that the caste rules prevented, that the so-called untouchables, because, that according to Hindu Dharma Shastra, say, if I can quote, the first Hindu Dharma Shastra is called Manu Shastra. It uses the word Chandal for untouchable. Chandal. Now, the Chandal, according to Manu Dharma Shastra, cannot possess anything. Cannot possess anything, that you come back to my first idea of power, that non-possession, non-possessiveness. So there is no power here. Yeah? Disempower body. The Chandala body, if you see, is a disempowered body. So he will not have any possession. He can possess certain things like a dog and a donkey. Very interestingly, that if you read Manu Dharma Shastra, then it suggests that a Chandal can possess only a dog and a donkey and a broken plate. And what will be his dress? Tattered cloth. What will be his duty? To do, that donkey's job, maybe. Yeah? And at the end of the day, he would collect what is called leftover food on his broken plate. Receiving end, what we use to disposition, powerlessness. Yeah. So think about a large population who are called untouchables. So I'll go to the extent by saying that this more than 330 million people today, of course, that earlier, if you talk about Indian, that ancient India, that could have been any 6%, so far as Indian population is concerned, could be an untouchable, who cannot walk on the road. Hope that I'll give you 2 or 3 examples from maybe medieval and modern examples, maybe that. So we are just that trying to address a large population who are called Shudra, Ati Shudra. There are also different names. I must try to, I must not forget to remind you that they are also called Panchama because they are in the fifth order. Yeah, in English we call outcast because the fourth order, that Brahmin, Kshatriya, Vaishya, Shudra, these are the fourth varna who are within the caste domain. They are called, that within caste. The other person, that the fifth varna is called outcast. That's because they are beyond caste, maybe outside caste. Now, that they are called Panchama Antyaja. There is a word called Antyaja because that is Antyaja is versus Dvija. No, Dvija is twice born. The so-called upper caste are born twice. Once from their mother's womb, and second time when they have what is called sacred thread ceremony, the initiation. That is another birth according to caste system. When they wear, of course, men only, women of that any community, including Brahmin community, they don't have any right to that uh, put sacred thread. So they are not Dvija. Yeah, only man. Dvija is twice born. Okay. Now, that this word Antyaja is end of birth. In other words, they cannot have another birth. So, Panchama, Antyaja, and at one point of time when Britishers came to India, they are called depressed class. The word Harijan, that is another very interesting example. No, they are at one point of time called Harijan. Hari is God and Jan is, the people, children of God. There is a misconception. It was given by Gandhi, which is not. Harijan is a term that is used by 17th century Bhakti poet from Gujarat called Narasimha Mehta. I'm sure you know that some of you have heard about. Narasimha Mehta is a 17th century Bhakti saint poet. Why did he call, that Harijan, meaning first place? That is the question. In Indian caste system, there was a compulsory, that rule. Actually, caste rules are compulsory, that even today. Yeah, that's why Khap Panchayat is there. Now, according to caste rule, the first daughter of a Dalit family is to be donated to the temple. This was a compulsory, that duty. So the first girl child, before getting menstruation, of course, that should be devoted to God of the temple. And the the people of the temple, they will train her both singing and dancing, classical singing. The history of Indian film is also basically related to caste because the first actors maybe that they happen to be either Dalit or Muslim. Yeah, I'll give you example maybe later. But this idea of Harijan came into picture because the Devadasi tradition you might have heard about. Devadasi, that. So the girls, those who were devoted to temple, they had to learn song and dance, that particularly because Indian gods are also, that they are very, that patriarch kind, that they would like to listen to classical song before going to sleep. Hope you know about that. Indian gods are like Indian men, no? They would like to be entertained before going to sleep. No, we have Jagannath, that's the Lord of the universe in Puri, who would like to brush his teeth. Also, that during winter when he takes bath, then he would, that have fever because of cold bath. No, hope you know about. And then he will have what is called, that n number of uh, food, no? different kinds of food Jagannath takes, that, and seasonal food, that whatever vegetables are available, of course, including fish, because Odia and Bengali, of course, would like to offer non-vegetarian food also. Yeah, hope you know about. So these Devadasi tradition, that evolved over the years because gods had to be entertained, no, in the temple. Yeah, and that's where the girls, those who are devoted, they are wedded to God, no, they are wedded to God because they are married to God. So before the god would go to sleep, there will be classical dance, so that just like we would like to go to sleep, so we'll have maybe that either I read a book before going to sleep, so that that you have some kind of maybe that understanding about the world and maybe that the universe. But that sometime you would like to listen to some old Hindi film song. Some of that us we would like to listen to in old Hindi film song. The kind of the raga and maybe so gods would that be entertained before they go to sleep. So the dance can go midnight. No. Now, that we all know that gods don't exist in the temple, no, because there will be wooden and stone structure, but there are demigods. So, in the process, these girls will also get pregnant and then they will give birth to children. So, the children born out of Devadasi, because that their mothers are known, but fathers are unknown. Who are the fathers, you never know. And that's where Narasimha Mehta called it, that children of Devadasi as children of God, because they are wedded to God. This is very interesting, that. So, say in Odisha, we have Odissi, hope you know about, that. So, there is Mahari tradition. I don't know whether you have heard about this word Mahari. You go to any part of India, there will be different tradition. Mahari, Devadasi, that in Maharashtra it is called different name, that in Andhra Pradesh it is called different name. But there was tradition of Devadasi. So children born out of Devadasi are called Harijan, which later Gandhi, because of political reasons, of course, will again bring Gandhi into different contexts, because there will be a fight between Gandhi and Ambedkar later. I will, bring this idea later maybe, but just at this time, we have to understand that the term Harijan is not a very, at least, that it is not a good term for Dalit, and that's why there is a rejection, because that Harijan meaning basically a kind of prostitution, yeah, temple prostitute, you can say. Devadasi is nothing but, according to Hindu social order, again actually referring to caste, it is basically temple prostitution. Devadasi tradition is nothing but temple prostitution. And of course, that the last term is scheduled caste. So I was just telling you that there are different terms, and each term has to be particularly understood in a historical context. Yeah. Now, that I will give you two or three other caste law, particularly in modern time. Say, if you go to Maharashtra, and Ambedkar will give you example, that there were caste laws which prevented Dalits to come to, that the public sphere. Particularly, that there were rules also which will prevent Dalits to come to certain, say, areas, like they cannot come to the upper caste lane or by lanes. They cannot come out from their home during morning and evening. This is very interesting, because their shadows are also considered to be polluting. Yeah. So Dalits are not just, that untouchables. That's why I use the word. They are also unapproachable, unseeable. That sometimes seeing their faces, according to Hindu law, meaning shastras, are crime or sin. it is considered to be a sin. So many of them were prevented to come during daytime. And that's why you hear the word uh, criminal tribe, you must have heard about. No, during British time, particularly 1871, if you read the report, this is again Indian Penal Code, that which is very famous. Criminal tribe, this word was used. Of course, before that also, from 1780s onwards, this idea of criminal, the tribes were used, but by 1871, this word, that was used in what is called Indian Penal Code, which is still continuing. So we have now, that more than say some 5 to 6 million people still inhabiting in India who are considered to be criminal tribe. And we have two, that good autobiography written by. So there is a community called Uchalya. I don't know how many of you have heard about Uchalya. They live in both Andhra Pradesh and that Maharashtra border, and they are that because they don't come out during daytime, they are only that occupation is thieving. Yeah, they are considered to be criminals. That police, every time there is a maybe that either robbery or maybe thieving, immediately they go and catch the people from the criminal tribe. So G.N. Devi has a book called Criminal Tribes, and Uchalya is autobiography of Lakshman Gaikwad. A fascinating autobiography, that you must read it, which suggests that a child from Uchalya community is being trained heavily, that including not only beating, and maybe, that if a child becomes a thief, and if a thief is being caught, that say in that condition, how the thief is going to be rescued, for example, because there are many ways whereby that punishment could be meted to him, but then he has to withstand the torture and kind of thing. So Uchalya is name of a community, and Uchalya is also the autobiography of Lakshman, that Gaikwad, whereby he talks about how an entire community, that lives in nothing but thieving. So, the caste rules made a particular community nothing but, the thieves, community of thieves actually. Now, there are two or three other caste rules which are very, meaning there are too many rules, but I'll just give you maybe three rules, caste rules. In Maharashtra, particularly, that even not only during 19th century, but even early part of 20th century, there was rule, while British rule was there, of course, there, uh, that a Dalit has to tie an earthen pot around the neck. Yeah, every Dalit, they try to imagine, if you are a painter or an artist, you have to imagine a Dalit. Every Dalit will tie an earthen pot around the neck, so that when we speak out, that according to that sociologists, because the whole idea is purity and impurity or pollution, whatever suppose. When we speak out, this putums comes out and it goes through the air. So when we tie an earthen pot, this putum will not fall to the ground, that, and that say pollute the others, particularly the upper caste. So every untouchable will tie an earthen pot around the neck. Every untouchable was forced to tie a broom on the back, tying a broom on the back, so that even the footprints, that whenever an untouchable walks, there will be footprint. So the broom will try to erase the footprint so that the upper caste can walk on the road. Now in Kerala, there was a community, meaning there is still a community called Pulaya community. And caste rules, that did not allow women of Pulaya community to cover their upper part of the body. Yeah, what was there was a tax to be given. If suppose a Pulaya woman covers her breast, then she has to give what is called breast tax. This is very important. Yeah, because she cannot cover her upper part of the body, so that the that upper caste man will try to that enjoy her nakedness, and that's why that there was what is called breast tax. Now in 1932, when British was still ruling, of course, that 1932, two things happened in the world, of course, the many things might have happened, but I, that try to emphasize these 2 points, that in 1932, breast tax was abolished, and there are many narratives that when, in one story, when the upper caste saw a Pulaya woman, that cover her breast, immediately he demanded tax. She caught one of her breast and threw, it is just like Kanagi. You must have heard about the story of Kanagi, that. So in 1932, British abolished what is called breast tax. Because that British law was hope that we many times try to interpret that British law for the first time in India tried to bring the idea of equality, that. And there are many novels I can tell you. In Odisha, we have what is called Fakirmon Senapati, Chaumana Athagunta, whereby according to British law, idea of equality prevail because a jamindar and a poor chokidar can go to jail equally, no, because of their maybe the crime, whatever. So British law for the first time treated people equal, unlike the Hindu law, because Hindu law was partial and definitely that uh, if you read n number of Hindu law, then upper caste, how much crime they may they do, they will go unpunished. Say if a Brahmin kills a that untouchable, nothing will happen. Yeah, no punishment. But the that opposite, say if an untouchable kills a Brahmin, then immediately he would be that killed, so that that proper at least that award is given for his punishment. So so these are three heinous crimes, that heinous Hindu law, that I cited. So with this kind of that scenario, the caste law, one cannot think about the idea of either equality or forget about social justice. So what I'm talking about is that, like Indian society, caste society, Indian literature was silent about the existence of a community called untouchable. So untouchable, that being untouchable because education was not available according to Manusmriti, as I have already pointed out, that Shudra, Ati Shudra and women of all community, they would not be able to read and write because Sanskrit was the dominant language in ancient time, of course, and in medieval time, of course, before coming of the Mughal, Sanskrit was the fourth language, hope you know about. After that, of course, it is Persian and then English when British came. English was introduced in India in 1835. Before that, of course, Persian was the, the fourth language. Now, being an untouchable, that um, one cannot think of that literacy, and that's where the people they could not articulate anything. Now it is only toward the beginning of maybe that 20th century that with the independent movement, with Gandhi at the epicenter of independent movement, that some of the that upper caste they started at least thinking about writing on untouchables. So the first novel that I come to know about, that devoting Dalit subjectivity is called. Many of you must not have heard about it. This is called Malapalli by Unnava Lakshminarayan. Uh, Unnava Lakshminarayan, of course, that was a lawyer by profession, and getting maybe that encouraged by Gandhi, he started writing. So from 1921, this book was published in 1921 called Malapalli. Now we have several novels, that say Mulkraj Anand's Untouchable, Premchand's Rangbhumi, then uh, then there are too many books, that I run an MPhil course. But what is very interesting, because that the idea of Indian literature say writing about Dalit will be discussed as something very, that what is called pity and sympathy, which Dalit they don't need. Yeah, pity and sympathy they don't need. So what emerged in modern time, because education is now available, I have already told you, particularly post-independence, and thanks for the struggle that, that anti-caste intellectual like Phule, Ambedkar, Periyar, Narayan Guru, Manguram from Punjab, Achyutanand in Uttar Pradesh, Bhima Bhoi in Odisha, that thanks for their what is called anti-caste intellectual, that activity, education became a center of, the Dalit discourse. And that's why we find Dalit literature emerged in Maharashtra, particularly in 1970s, with Dalit Panthers movement following Black Panthers. That this is a very radical kind of, that movement. And now what we find, Dalit literature in all languages. Now, Dalit studies is considered to be a kind of autonomous discipline like English studies. So, that Dalit study, that particularly in the context of Dalit study, we have to talk about two, three things. One is that now people, those who are silent over the millennia, as I told you from the very beginning, they are now what is called speaking subject. Now they can articulate. So one is talking about revolution, because writing revolution, as I have already told you, Dalit is a political subject, and that's why the idea of articulation has to be understood in a particular context, whereby Dalit subjectivity, they are now trying to talk about the reconstruction of Indian society towards what is called, that say social justice, empowerment, and the idea of freedom. Yeah, what Ambedkar talks about equality, freedom, of course, that equality, freedom, and justice. Justice, both social, economic, and political. Uh, I must touch upon, that now with the coming of Dalit literature, there is new language, because earlier Indian language is Sanskritized and Brahminized. Now the ordinary language of common people every day, that spoken language of, that ordinary and common people, now it is coming to the purview of Dalit literature. There is also new, that what is called new aesthetic. Dalit aesthetic challenges the whole idea of Satyam Shivam Sundaram. Rasa and Dhani theory, if you know about, that it challenges the whole idea of, that how literature is not just for enjoyment or entertainment, but it is for social reconstruction based on, idea of justice, as I have already told you. So with the, that with coming of Dalit literature, we find not only new language, new aesthetic, or new subjectivity, also the idea of, that new historiography, that Dalit are now writing about, as at the beginning I told you, Untouchable Spring, the Kalyan Rao's, that the idea of rewriting history from Dalit perspective. Now, Dalit is a very general term, as I have already told you. Dalit women, if they are writing, Dalit women are now trying to also bring the whole idea of Dalit patriarchy as well. No, there is a very nice debate, that whether there is patriarchy in Dalit community. So there are, say, Kanchailia, will say that no, Dalit community is egalitarian, but Gopal Guru, Sarmila Regi, and even, that say, Bibi Kamle's The Prison We Broke, which is one of the finest Dalit women's autobiography, talks about Dalit patriarchy. So with this, that what we find, maybe I'll conclude, that with a quote from, very general quote though, but it talks about French Fanon. So Dalits have arrived, that as I was telling you, after a spell of long silence, Dalit subjectivity has arrived into the field of literary, maybe, study. Now, French Fanon, the writer of Black Skin and White Masks, as we all, that know, look at his expression, which is also, considered to be one of the finest articulation. He says, and I quote him, as soon as I desire, I'm asking to be considered. Look at, that the language. As soon as I desire, I'm asking to be considered. I'm not merely here and now, sealed into thingness. He uses the word thingness. No, I have already told you that earlier, Dalits were considered to be object. Now they have become subject. So, I am not merely here and now, sealed into thingness. I am for somewhere else and for something else. I demand that notice be taken of my negating activity insofar as I pursue something other than life, insofar as I do battle for the creation of a human world. Look at the human world. That is a world of reciprocal recognition. I should constantly remind myself that the real leap consists in introducing invention into existence. In the world in which I travel, I'm endlessly creating myself. And it is by going beyond the historical, instrumental hypothesis that I will initiate cycle of freedom. Thank you.